So this is our attempt to prep Emerson's essay Compensation. We're going to call it Do the Thing, and see if this is at all helpful for the teachers of English 10, The Habits of Thriving. The usual disclaimer, there's all sorts of ways to approach this essay. This is one way, and it's a very partisan way. We're going to focus on a couple handfuls of quotations and talk them through, and I hope it's helpful. So 3 sets of concepts here to focus on: internal versus external goods, the merely human versus the divine, and the adjacent possible. Again, a lot of us have talked about internal-external good distinction. I think it's relatively familiar. We'll cross that when we come to it here. We're going to make a distinction between the human and the divine's not going to be some God up in the sky. We'll see if that's helpful. If not, you can always ditch it. It's very workable without it. Emerson likes to talk about God, for better or worse. And the adjacent possible, which may well be new to you, I think is a very zesty concept from complexity theory and physics. So we will talk about those at the appropriate times. So Emerson starts the essay with this discussion of the Last Judgment, and I think it's sort of explicit, sort of implicit question. I would phrase it this way, right? Are good people compensated in their goodness, for their goodness, or not rewarded? So 3 options there: in their goodness, for their goodness, or not rewarded at all. That begs the question, what is the difference between being compensated for an act and being compensated in an act? So we're going to have to address that. Internal goods are the goods that are enjoyed in the act of doing something. In particular, it seems that the more complex and the richer and the act, and the more it requires of you, the more internal goods are possible in it. Playing chess has a lot more internal goods than playing Go Fish, which has very few. For instance, there's only one way to get the goods from playing chess, and it's to play chess. External goods come from outside: money, popularity, prestige. Often these are very generic. $5 is $5 is $5. Popularity is kind of specific, kind of general. They're far more general. They come from the outside of the act. So the doctrine of the Last Judgment assumes that people are compensated for their acts, but not in their acts. So, you've done something that's allegedly good, but you need to be rewarded for it externally because the compensation wasn't in the doing. So internal goods are compensated in the doing. External goods come from outside and might be tied to the doing in some way. But so the doctrine of the Last Judgment assumes that you're compensated for the good or the wickedness that you did, because otherwise you wouldn't need to balance the books, because it would have been in the deed. So Emerson concludes that, our common understandings, that at least theoretical understandings in his time of morality, show that the good isn't really good. It's not. There's no goodness in the good. It's just this weird, bizarre attempt by people to manipulate other people through language, and maybe even manipulate themselves to get them to behave in certain ways that appear to be necessary, but that aren't good. So you invent this other mechanism where you get rewarded or punished later for your deed. But what could that mean other than that the good isn't good and that wickedness isn't wicked? And of course, we've got 90% of our boys have this suspicion to a good degree, right? If not outright belief that that is true, and that is a huge problem for the home team. And I think Emerson's pervading tone through these opening pages is, let's cut the crap, no more baloney. Either praying and praising, loving and serving men are good, and then let's do them, or they're not good, and then let's stop lying about it. Let's just stop lying about ethics and morality and figure out the truth and tell the truth. So it might help here to try to get at, what exactly would be internal compensation. Like, who would have internal compensation? Is this a flaw that it's this way, or that we're this way, that we need this external compensation? Like, what's going on here? So again, maybe these questions will help. What is God's compensation for creating the universe? Does he get paid? Does he get some sort of external compensation? I've heard from David Brown that in the Bible, in some traditions, it's the praise of his creation. But again, wow, that really makes God out to be kind of low, it seems to me. But anyway, I think from Emerson's point of view, God doesn't have any compensation for creating the universe, right? Other than the internal goods of doing it. So that would be a good example. Could you imagine God selling off the universe after he grew it like a corporation or something? Like, what's he doing? How would one reward Jesus in heaven for his extraordinary love and service? Again, hookers and cocaine. Like, what exactly would you give Jesus to reward him for loving people? I mean, Jesus is just going to want to love people more, right? That's what he's going to do in heaven. He's what he was doing on earth, because it's good to do. What is Michelangelo's compensation for painting the Sistine Chapel? Well, I'm sure he gets fame, and there might be part of him that likes that fame, and he gets some money, and part of him that likes that money. But he also gets to paint the ceiling, right? He gets to paint the wall. He gets to paint the Sistine Chapel. That act of creation, that's his. That's him self-engaged. That's him producing out of his own being more world. What is a good father's compensation for his good fathering? Well, again, there can be external compensation for that, for sure, and there's sort of genetic compensation for it, but there's also the building of another person, right? Imagine a dad taking $10 to father his own child. It's a strange idea. What is your compensation for building something that you love? A friendship, a team, a robot, a skill. Try to ask questions that get the boys to that space where, oh, wow, I have something, or two things, or three things, or four activities that I do, or more, that I'm like God. I do them for the love of the world that happens when I do them. And, that's a good thing to get the boys to understand. And if some of them are going to have a bunch of those things already, and some aren't. So let's make that human-divine distinction here. Human animals need external compensation. There's nothing terribly wrong with that. We all need food, clothing, shelter. We all want money. It's helpful to have. We can do a lot of things with it. We want to be thought well of by other people. There's all sorts of external goods that are fine, and to think of that's the animal in us that wants those, and or you could say the lizard brain and the liminal covering of the brain, but the divine you could think of as the frontal cortex, right? It's very free. It's very different. It gets to take the lay of the land on its own, and is free of a lot of this genetic survival instinct. And so to think of the divine as having compensation so closely bound to the act that they're really indistinguishable. And so that the good is not separable from the act for the divine. And so when we do things without the need for external reward for their goodness, we are divine. When we make things for the made and the delight in the more world that comes about through our act, in our act, that's divine. Let's define it that way. So to circle back a little bit, so when we asked, how would you compensate Jesus for loving and serving men, that's part of Emerson's questions. Like, is that how you would reward them in heaven? Well, that they can do now, right? So the external compensation isn't needed. So either it's doubloons and champagne, or it's loving and serving. And if it's doubloons and champagne, then this whole thing stinks. And if it's loving and serving, then there's no need for the judgment anyway. So there you go. It's an absurd doctrine, and the preacher is blind. And ultimately, he really does think, Emerson, if you follow his logic, the preacher thinks that it's actually good to do wicked things. Because otherwise, why would you need to be harmed later to make up for the good that you got by doing it? And that's the question. I don't think it has an answer. I think Emerson's spot on. So Emerson makes this important distinction between compensation in the thing, or in the deed, or in the soul, depending on where he says it, and in the circumstance, which isn't so closely tied together. So every act rewards itself in two ways. One, in the doing. So that's what we've just been talking about, sort of the divine way, in the actual act that's inseparable from the act. So when you do good, the compensation for the good is in the doing. And then there's the sort of the external manifestation of it, which usually follows upon it. It just sometimes takes a while. So the thief, Emerson would argue, hurts himself by doing the injustice of stealing. He may or may not get caught. He's probably going to get caught if he keeps doing it, right? But as we know, sometimes people don't get caught. So that's the circumstance, whether you get caught or not, and that's tied to the deed. But that the thief is being malicious in his theft and selfish, that is baked into the act itself. And so this is actually a good place to think about the objection that the kids always raise about, what happens if you don't get caught. And so this is the way to begin to address that. So let's talk about these two quotations now, as he shifts gears and says, the ingenuity of man has been dedicated to the solution of one problem: how to detach the sensual sweet, the sensual strong, the sensual bright, etc., from the moral sweet, the moral deep, the moral fair. And of course, you need to understand the tone here, otherwise the passage will get misunderstood, because it's not like he's not in favor of this. This is a bad thing for people to try to do. And so to understand, again, this is the human. The human is trying to do this, misuse his imagination in order to try to separate things that ought not be separated. And of course, if it's time of great scarcity and the big issue is calories in versus calories out, well, of course you're going to try to separate these things, because the moral situation is going to get you killed. But now things are different, and we can be divine in ways that we used to not be able to be divine. And we should stop trying to cheat in this way. Let's stop trying to separate these. God would not try to separate these, right? A divine being would not try to separate these. Michelangelo wouldn't try to separate these. What if you could just, blink and the Sistine Chapel would be done? Well, what would there be in that, right? So it's the investment of your being in the care of the world that is actually something you want, right? It's like the highest activity of your being. It's not calories out. And again, life invests itself with inevitable conditions which the unwise seek to dodge, which one and another brags that he does not know. But the brag is on his lips, the conditions are in his soul. So again, you could translate this as stop trying to cheat. Stop trying to cheat. Only the unwise seek to dodge this. And of course, many of the boys spend 90% of their time trying to dodge this, right? They spend more time on Cliff Notes than they spend on the text. And that's how screwed up they are, right? They take pride in dodging their responsibilities often, and that needs to be addressed. And Emerson has that paragraph where he's got all these pithy quotations from the past, and two of these I think are really good. What will you have, quoth God, pay for it and take it, is, I think, an extraordinarily powerful summation of his whole point, right? It's like, don't wait for something to come on sale. Don't wait till painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling goes on sale and you can do it for only half the energy, or parenting goes on sale and you can parent your child without actually doing any work. It's like the things worth doing never go on sale because the goods are only in the doing. So pay for it and take it. Don't complain that you don't have it. Don't wait for it to go on sale. Do what you can do in this way. Be divine as best you can now, and you're going to grow in your powers to be more divine as you go. Pay for it and take it. Stop waiting for things to go on sale. Stop trying to steal them, and stop sitting around. The other one that ends that whole series is the devil is an ass. And so, again, what a great expression. I'd never heard it before. Emerson wrote this. I don't know, maybe it was a popular expression before, but the devil's an ass. So, the devil gets away with a lot of stuff, right? The devil, who knows? He steals whatever. He gets somebody to lie. He's dishonest or whatever. But the devil has to be the devil, right? Would you want to trade places with the devil? And what would that mean if your answer is no? Here he gets away with all this stuff. He takes stuff that isn't his. He lies. He does whatever, right? But if you wouldn't trade places with him, then let's learn a lesson from that. The devil's an ass. The devil is an ass in all of this doing, and he has to be an ass. He has to be the ass that he is. And so upon consideration, the boys realize, like, wow, yeah. And then you try to ask them, and why do you keep trying to cheat the system then? Why do you keep trying to be this kind of little mini devil if you realize it's a useless proposition? And then finally, again, just totally turning our genetic inheritance on its head. He is great who confers the most benefits, right? Because that's the builder, that's the maker, that's the ethos builder, that's the person who helps, that's the person who has the most, right? The person with the most is the only person who can confer the most benefits. It's ultimately the only evidence that you really have the most is that you confer the most benefits. It's not the person who takes the most without paying for it at all. And, here he just keeps going with the same line of thought. The thief steals from himself, the swindler swindles himself. For the real price of labor is knowledge and virtue, whereof wealth and credit are signs. Right? Blah, blah, blah. These ends of labor cannot be answered but by real exertions of the mind, or by the being, and in obedience to pure motives. The cheat, the defaulter, the gambler cannot extort the benefit, cannot extort the knowledge of material and moral nature, which his honest care and pains yield to the operative. So again, that's why the issue of internal goods versus external goods is so important here, right? You can steal the external things. You can't steal the internal things. You can't steal those. And so if that's where the value is to a being who is wise, right? That a wise being sees that that's where the real jackpot is, then you're going to stop trying to cheat, because then you're not going to be learning, and learning an application of creating is the highest form of life possible. And that's why the thief steals from himself. It's why the kid who plagiarizes is ultimately, basting himself in his own juices and cooking his own goose. So we now turn to arguably, the best line in the essay, introduced in this, oracular way. Imagine writing this yourself. The law of nature is, do the thing and you shall have the power, but they who do not the thing have not the power. And this sort of gets at the paradox of virtues in general, right? And trying to become a more virtuous person, because, of course, virtues are habits. And so they're already at work in setting the table for how you respond to situations. So if you have bad habits, it's very hard to change them, because you're liable to act on those bad habits. And so, here, do the thing, right? Do the hard thing. Paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Learn how to write an introductory paragraph. Learn how to speak Spanish. Go learn how to play football and play on the team, right? Do the thing, whatever it is, and you shall have the power that comes from doing that thing. Do not the thing, and you have not the power. And so, first of all, is that true? It seems completely true to me, right? It's like, why wait is the lesson to the kids. What are they doing playing all these video games, right? What are they learning? What's the thing that they're learning that's going to provide power for their lives by doing that, right? Go into the musical, right? Do the newspaper, do the mark, do student council if you can, play the saxophone, help the kid next to you in class, make friends, go to ISAS, right? We've got kids who are doing that and they're profiting marvelously, right? We have some unbelievably powerful boys. Guess what? They're the boys who have been engaging on the happy side of the curve for years, most of them. Guess who the least powerful boys in the school are? Coincidence? Well, they're not doing anything, right? And because they haven't done anything, they're growingly incapable of doing things, thus they can't sign on. And you get this vicious circle and virtuous circles for the other boys. So this is a central, powerful passage, I think, because Emerson's right. This is the law of nature. Do the thing and you shall have the power. Those who do not the thing have not the power. Because that passage is so important, let's just keep going with it and introduce this concept that we'll call the adjacent possible. It's a concept that was invented in the merging of a lot of sciences in what's called complexity theory, about how the world makes progress and moves on. So the adjacent possible and it's a great combination of those words. It's adjacent, meaning it's next door to reality now, and it's possible. So the adjacent possible is reality, all the ways reality could be one step from now, be that a step in chemical reactions, be that a step in a game. So you can imagine a knight near the center of a chessboard. It can go up to the left, up to the right, to the right and up, to the right and down to the right, down to the left, down, and to the left, up. It's got 8 different places it can go. The adjacent possible for that piece is those 8 places it could go. On a Monopoly board, you can roll the dice. There's 11 different places that your game peg can end up, right, on the board. That's its adjacent possible. So try to think if you're at a certain place in your development as a writer, then there's sort of the next step for you in possible gain is there, but some things are more like 5 steps away, right? So again, an 8th grader's got a long way to go to be a really strong writer. He's got many, many, many steps to learn. He can't jump there all at once. You don't jump right from algebra to calculus, etc. So that's the adjacent possible. So how do we bring this to life for the boys? So you try to think of it this way, right? The adjacent possible, like do the thing and you shall have the power. That's why we're studying the adjacent possible in the first place. So you do the thing and you get the internal good of doing it. And if you do the thing and you do it well, you increase your skills to learn how to do more, so that by doing A, you get the power to do, say, B, C, and D. But if you just sit there, you can't do B, C, and D. Your adjacent possible stagnates. And this is central to what we're trying to teach the boys about life. And so, again, try to imagine a kid who's got the option of playing video games and drinking soda at home in his basement, or he can try out for the football team, say. So let's say he tries out for the football team, but he's got to lift weights to do that. So he builds up his body and he makes the team. And let's just say he starts and he gains all this confidence and he makes friends. And it turns out one of those friends is on the Mark staff and pulls him on to be one of the sub-editors of the Mark. Right? Well, now he's doing that. Well, how did he do that? Well, it was because he made a friend. Why did he make the friend? Because he was on the football team. Well, how did he make the football team? Well, he started working out. So you see all these steps, these next steps. So you do the thing and you get the power. You lift the weights, you get the power to be on the football team. You are on the football team, you get the power to make a friend on the football team. Make a friend on the football team, you get the power to get invited to be on the Mark staff. And who knows where you go from there, right? So again, this notion of a virtuous circle, and always keeping in mind that the boys' lives as men are going to be dominated by the need to be skilled at caring for other people and solving their problems. The boys are not ready yet. They need to get there, and the way to do it is to practice. Do the thing, and you shall have the power, right? Do not listen to the lizard brain. Do not listen to the covering of the lizard brain, the liminal covering of the lizard brain, which are saying conserve calories, stay in your basement, eat the chips. Right? Sit there like an animal conserving its energy. No, no, no. It's the 21st century and you have the possibility of being God, right? So let's actualize that possibility. Here's another passage where I think, the tone is largely missed by the boys, or at least often, and they don't realize that he's sort of playing devil's advocate here. So, this is where he says, look, let's think about this. You can imagine somebody saying, what, you're saying I can't get the upper hand on life? I never get more than I put in? Well, why would I ever do anything then, right? Everything's indifferent. If nothing's ever on sale, why would I ever trade for it? You only trade for what's on sale. And so he's concerned, right? He's putting forth this objection to his own idea in order to make a point and get past it, and it's the coming passage where he gets past it. So turning point in the essay, right? There is a deeper fact in the soul than compensation, to wit, its own nature. The soul is not a compensation, but a life. Certainly a candidate for the most important line in the essay. Again, he doesn't call the essay life, right? He calls it compensation because he thinks that's where the action is. That's where we're focused. That's where we waste so much time and energy wondering how we're going to get paid. Try to imagine God again. God's not gonna get paid, but God makes the universe anyway. Try to imagine, like, what would it cost to, pay Michelangelo for the Sistine Chapel, and that, like, to actually pay him for what it ends up being worth. Like, you can't, there's not that much money around, right? But that doesn't mean he's not going to do it. Beethoven's cranking out these late string quartets, just in physical misery, and not even using the bathroom because he's writing so intently to try to get these things done before he dies. And, like, there's life, right, where it's the making. And the second quotation, right, there's virtue. I think the best way to explain this to kids and to understand it is to think about it in terms of making world, right? When you're making world, there's no need for the kind of compensation that we usually stress about, because the world is what this is about. God is in the creation business. And when you're making friendships, when you're making teams, when you're making robots, when you're making schools, when you're making classes, when you're making families, the notion of getting paid from the outside, though fine and dandy, great, the more money the better, right? But it fades away. None of us are doing this for the kind of compensation that most people go into most jobs for. And we're trying to get the boys in that space, right? To think about that, those few things where they really, really don't care about the external compensation nearly as much as the making, and to try to excite them about that making. And so that's the basis of where we're going here, and we'll take one more crack at it. So if we try to think of it this way, right, the objector's saying, wait a minute, I invest energy like anybody invests anything because there's a profit involved. And so profit equals revenue minus cost. And what Emerson's saying is that, hey, revenue equals cost, right? You're not going to get more out of it than you put into it. And so, again, the objection would be, well, why would you ever invest if revenue equals cost, right? And again, one way to think about it, and we've talked about this before, but it really, I think, works, is to think, 5 equals 5 is not the same as 5,000 equals 5,000. Yeah, revenue always equals cost, but for one person, there is a friendship at the end of it. And for another person, they got to level 5 in a video game, and that's how they spent their summer. And other people were out learning how to make friends and learning how to build chapels and learning how to relate to people and serve their fellow man. Do the thing and you shall have the power. There's crappy little worlds, and there's much bigger, more vibrant, interesting worlds. Do the thing and you shall have the power. 5 equals 5 is not the same as 5,000 equals 5,000. Neither of them has the kind of profit that an external goods being would be looking for. But one of them is a small little world, and one of them is a huge world. And again, the issue is try to think of it in terms of God and the making of world. What world have you made today? This passage is just a monster of power and possibility. Emerson again raises an objection to his own idea here, which is like, wow, some people have so much and some people have so little. How do the people with little not feel jealous and envious and angry about having less than the others? And don't you just have to, redistribute that all? And until they do, some people should be really upset. And I don't think Emerson's essay is trying to get people to be socially apathetic about inequalities or whatever. I think he's giving the best advice I've ever read about how do you deal with that situation, granted that situation is there. And of course, we have boys who are extraordinarily jealous of each other's achievements. And we know what that's like to be jealous of other people's achievements, but we also know what it's like to to have, through friendship and concern and care and empathy and compassion, become so fond of another person that we own their life outcome, so that when things go well for them, we're thrilled about it, right? So, Emerson's saying here, right, the heart and soul of all men being one, this bitterness of his and mine ceases. His is mine. I am my brother, and my brother is me. If I feel overshadowed and outdone by great neighbors, I can yet love. I can still receive. And he that loveth maketh his own the grandeur he loves. Another candidate for the best line in the essay. And of course, Emerson's in metaphysical mode here, unfortunately, in my opinion, right? So this idea that there's this soul and it's this metaphysical principle and we're all united. Well, good luck explaining that, right? Good luck ever hashing that out. Though in some, cosmic sense, right, we all come from the Big Bang or whatever. I think it's much more accurate, right, to say we can be one, right? We can be one. You have to learn empathy and compassion, but those are available to us. And through our concern for other people and through empathy and compassion, we can feel with and own the success and failure and life outcomes and feelings of other people. We can't fully own them, but we can approximate them. And, then you get, through that effort, again, it's an accomplishment. It's not just given, but through that accomplishment, other people's success can be your success. So if you are a loving, empathetic, compassionate person and you make your entire sophomore class your in-group, well, then all the achievements of all those boys, and there are many, become your achievements in an important way. And if you don't do that, well, then it's back to the lizard brain, right? And it's him against me, and it's my little pocket of friends against those guys. And it's my in-group against all these out-groups. And what a mess. He that loveth maketh his own the grandeur that he loves. Do you love literature? Well, then all of that work and good becomes tantalizing and wonderful to you and speaks to you, right? Do you love engineering? Well, then all of the great engineering projects of the world become vibrant to you, right? And you're like, oh, wow, what a great thing that person did. What a great thing that she did, right? And you own them. This is available to us, right? You could be jealous about other people's achievements, but there's things we can do to actually expand ourselves so that their achievements are our achievements. And so this idea of appropriation, how do you appropriate as much of the good of life as possible? And that's what Emerson's talking about, so that everybody's divinity is affirmed. And again, I would say it's empathy and compassion here. Again, Emerson plays the metaphysics card, unfortunately, but that's where it is. And finally, there's this passage near the end that is also very powerful, and Emerson sort of raises the objection against his own idea of compensation. As what about when tragedy strikes? And of course, there's limits to what he's talking about here that he doesn't want to acknowledge, because again, he gets all this philosophical, metaphysical head of steam, and he wants this all to be, metaphysically true rather than just practically true. But you get in a certain kind of traffic accident, you get terrible brain damage. It's game over for you, and there's no real way necessarily for that to get made up. Accidents don't really fit into Emerson's system very well. And again, that's just a limitation of the system and doesn't show that it's wrong unless you're trying to make it a metaphysical system. But anyway, this issue of oh, woe is me, this thing happened and it shouldn't have happened, and I didn't deserve this bad thing that happened. I broke my leg. I got passed over for X recognition. I didn't get, the kind of raise I deserved or whatever, how all this goes. I didn't make cum laude. I didn't, whatever. I didn't make the basketball team, whatever. And so, you could imagine having your heart set on that, and then now you're against the world and you're upset and you think you've been dealt with unjustly. And he's like, look, there's ways of addressing this phenomenon, right? And to try to summarize here, what I think the best of what he's saying is like all you have in your power is to build as much world as you can wherever you happen to be with whatever skills you happen to have, right? And so to identify with the circumstances of your life and the circumstantial powers, to identify with those is to sort of be a shellfish that won't leave its shell, or that if its shell cracks, well, it would crack, right? Because it identifies with those. And he talks about, allowing all your worldly relations to hang very loosely about you, right? And so it's just they happen to be there. You happen to have certain tools in order to build. And some of those tools might break. You might be able to get more tools. The tools that you have in any given moment are the tools that you have in every given moment. And don't lose focus on the building, right? Because that's all you can do anyway. And that's where the jackpot of value is in the early 21st century, the fortunate beings that we are. And so not to fall back into this concern about compensation, because remember, gods aren't concerned with compensation. Gods are concerned with building. And so that's always the question. What can you build? So you don't want to identify yourself with your tools, because you're just always going to want to be building with whatever tools you have available. And you're always on the hunt for more. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. Feedback always appreciated. And let's go from here.